It was the sort of night that kept people indoors. The wind howled across the open plains, and the snow didn't fall gently. It slashed sideways, biting like grit. The ranch stood engulfed in a blanket of white, the only light inside flickering weakly from the dying fire. Thomas had long since given up listening for footsteps. He sat in his armchair, eyes fixed on the embers, a half-drunk bottle of whiskey beside him, untouched. The house groaned softly, weary with time and sorrow, just like him. Then came the knock. Not loud, just present. Soft, out of place. A quiet tapping on the door, unsure, as though whoever was out there wasn't certain they had the right to be heard. He didn't move at first. Ghosts didn't knock. But it came again, slower this time, colder. When he finally opened the door, she stood there, barefoot in the snow, shawl soaked, blood drying near her temple, eyes wide and impossible to read. They stared at each other. Then she collapsed. His arms caught her before he even thought to move. She was far too light, trembling and icy. He didn't ask anything. He simply brought her in, laid her near the fire, and wrapped her in the blanket his wife once cherished. And for the first time in 3 years, silence was no longer a comfort. Morning came slow and soft, the storm behind them. The world transformed into white stillness. Snow sagged over the fence posts and icicles clung like teeth to the eaves. Inside, the fire was fading, but the girl remained curled under the patchwork quilt, her breath shallow. Thomas, unsleeping, sat nearby with a mug of cooling coffee in his hands. Her stillness unnerved him. He'd seen that kind before. Not just sleep, but memory or nightmare. Grief had taught him the difference. Close to mid-morning, she stirred. A finger twitch, a breath shift, eyes opening only slightly, squinting at the light. She jolted up. Thomas didn't flinch. "Easy," he said quietly. "You're safe here." She looked around, panic tight in her chest. "I ain't gonna hurt you," he added. "You fell. I brought you in." Still no words, just eyes, dark and stormy. "You got a name?" She shook her head. Whether it meant no or not for you, he didn't know. "That's fine," he said. "Don't need one." He slid a plate across the floor, toast, eggs, dried apple slices. She studied the food, then him, then took a slice slowly, hands shaking. She didn't say thank you. She didn't need to. The way she didn't run, the way her shoulders lowered barely, was thanks enough. She wouldn't be leaving before sundown. Not yet. By the third day, things had changed. The quiet was no longer a void, but something beginning to settle. She moved through the house like a wisp, always barefoot, never touching anything she didn't need to. Thomas let her be. He didn't ask where she came from or why she bled. He remembered what it was like to be asked too soon. He watched her from the barn window one morning as she shuffled to the porch, quilt wrapped tight. Her eyes scanned the porch, the rocking chair, the bench. She paused at the open front door. Inside, she stepped carefully across the threshold. Thomas was at the table, drying his hands. She didn't flinch, but her gaze stopped at the mantel above the fireplace. A photo in a cracked frame. A laughing woman in a cotton dress, arms around Thomas. The girl's expression didn't change, but the air did. Thomas saw it. He turned, picked up the photo, hesitated, then slid it into a drawer. No explanation. None needed. The silence that followed wasn't hollow. It gave space. And then, she sat in the chair that used to be his wife's. For the first time since the storm, Thomas didn't look away. The days began to stretch slowly. Snow started to give under the sun, though mornings still bit with cold. She stayed, never said a word, never left the yard. But she changed, swept the floor, folded the blanket, brought water from the well. Her rhythm matched his, a rhythm born from grief turned routine. Thomas didn't say much, but he noticed, like how she startled when he coughed or how her eyes flicked to the kettle before it whistled. Things someone who couldn't hear wasn't supposed to react to. He tested it once, dropped a spoon behind her. She twitched, just slightly. Enough. That night, as she sat near the fire with her tea, he said gently, "You hear things, don't you?" She froze, didn't look up, but her hands gripped the mug tighter. "I won't tell no one." Still silence. "I just figured. Maybe silence ain't always what it seems." The fire popped. A log shifted. And then, so faint it could have been imagined, she nodded. Thomas let out a slow breath, leaned back, watching the flames. "You hear me now?" A pause. Another nod. And just like that, the silence between them wasn't a barrier anymore. It was a way of speaking. Nights on the ranch were still slow but different. Shared. She sat by the fire again, knees hugged to her chest, quilt tight, hair damp from washing, watching the flames the way he once did, as if they might answer something no one else could. Thomas joined her, placed 2 mugs down, and settled into the opposite chair. "You ever hear about the horse that walked back 3 counties after being sold?" he asked. And for the first time she didn't flinch. She remained still, but her eyes shifted toward him, taking in every word. "That horse used to be my brother's," he said quietly, "until some fool swapped him for a saddle and a bottle. The horse broke loose 2 nights later, came trotting back with the rope still tied to him." Her expression stayed blank, but her hands eased just slightly. Thomas offered a small smile. "Some creatures remember where they belong, even if others forget." He kept talking, spinning soft tales about the land, a long-gone dog, and how his wife once hummed the same off-key tune while she cooked. The girl didn't laugh, didn't answer, but she listened, and something in Thomas began to ease, bit by bit. He wasn't used to talking without expectation. No responses, no questions, just someone there. And then, one evening before she turned in, she looked directly at him. Her eyes held something tender, unreal, a flicker of trust. Not because he'd earned it, but because she decided he might. By week's end, she moved through the house with quiet familiarity. Not like she fully belonged, not yet. She still hesitated at noises, still lingered in doorways like waiting for an invitation. But she wasn't just a visitor anymore. That morning she tried to bake bread. It failed, the dough heavy and the crust nearly inedible. Thomas ate it anyway, not leaving a bite. Afterward, he retrieved a small leather book and a bit of chalk from a drawer. When he opened it, she saw pages covered in rough drawings and symbols. "Used to be my sister's," he explained. She didn't speak either. Ma taught her these. He'd forgotten most. But now he held up 2 fingers, tapped them to his lips, and pointed at her. "Thank you." She blinked, unsure, but mirrored the sign. Her hand shook. Thomas gave a slow nod and turned the page. Hungry, cold, safe. They practiced each night, awkward but patient. She picked it up quickly, not from the signs themselves, but because for once silence was allowed. She began to reply with gestures, with looks, with small, brave choices. A double tap for yes, a single for no. A hand to her chest when she felt something. A gesture toward his coffee when she wanted company. He never pressed. He offered room. And between them, slowly, a new way of speaking took shape, one neither had known before. Then the storm came. Angry winds, thick clouds, and thunder that rattled the windows. Thomas was in the barn, tending nervous horses. But his thoughts were with her inside the house. Loud noises scared her. She hadn't made a sound when he left. As rain began to pelt the ground, he hurried back, only to find the house empty. "No," he whispered, already spinning back toward the fields. That's when he saw them. Footprints, barefoot, headed toward the pasture. He didn't stop for a coat. Lightning cracked the sky. He ran. And there she was, crouched beside a broken fence, arms shielding something small and shaking. A foal, soaked, barely breathing. She'd laid herself over it. "What in God's name?" he began, breath-catching. She turned to him, drenched, eyes fierce. Not afraid, not sorry, only protecting. And suddenly he got it. She hadn't fled. She'd heard the storm and acted. No questions. No words. Just instinct. He lifted the foal and she followed, slipping in the wet grass but never letting go of him. Back in the barn, she brought towels, water, hay, moving with focus, with purpose. When the foal finally stilled, Thomas looked at her. "You could have been hurt," he said. She didn't react. But you weren't. She lifted her hands. One flat, one forming a circle. She pressed them together. The sign wasn't perfect, but it hit him hard. She hadn't said safe. She'd said home. And she meant here. The storm passed. Morning came, bright and quiet. The foal survived. Thomas found her asleep in the hayloft, curled near the stall. One hand rested loose on the railing. He let her sleep and worked below. He should have been mad. He wasn't. He was proud. When she joined him in the kitchen, face red from the cold, hair wild with sleep, she didn't shy away. She washed up, pulled 2 mugs from the shelf and placed one beside his. Then, slowly, gently, she reached out. Not to take, not to flinch, but just to touch him. A second, no more. Warmth. Will. Thomas didn't move. No one had touched him like that in years, not from need or comfort, but choice. She sat down, quiet, peaceful. Something shifted between them, not desire, not yet, but recognition. She no longer feared breathing beside him. She reached out not as a guest, but as someone who'd stayed. Word got around. It always did in a place like Edmonton. Thomas rarely went into town unless he had to. But this time she wanted to come. Said so with her eyes and signs. She wore a soft blue shawl he'd dug out of an old chest. Her hair loose, her posture stronger than before. But as soon as they stepped off the wagon, eyes followed. Whispers sparked. Is that the girl from the hills? Didn't her own father trade her for whiskey? She stayed close, fingers curled on the wagon bench, not clutching, grounding. At the general store, the clerk sneered. She yours? Thomas didn't blink. She lives under my roof. That what we're calling it now? The girl froze by the door. Thomas dropped the grain sack hard. She works. She eats. She lives in peace. She deserves respect. The clerk just rang him up. On the way home, she didn't speak. But her hand found his, and this time she didn't let go. As the ranch came into view, he said quietly, They don't know you. They don't get to name you. She looked at him, formed the sign for safe, and placed it on his chest. When he covered her hand with his, it didn't feel like protection anymore. Felt like a vow. Days passed, long and quiet. The silence now held understanding. One evening, as the sky turned dusky violet, she pulled a small bundle from beneath her shawl and laid it on the table. Inside was a faded cloth, stitched in unfamiliar patterns. Soft colors, careful hands. She gave it to him. He turned it gently, tracing each line. Curves like rivers, marks like ancient trails. He looked up. She nodded once. Not a story. Not a warning. Just truth. Past offered, not explained. He folded the cloth, set it on the table and said, I don't need to know everything. He murmured gently, Not yet, but I'm here. Her fingers skimmed his hand, light, unsure. And for once, the weight of yesterday didn't feel like a shackle but something finer. A thread that might be reworked into something new. The steady peace of the ranch shattered one evening with the low thunder of hooves. Thomas stood watching from the window, tension drawing tight in his chest as riders neared, a trail of dust rising like a warning. The men from town stopped at the gate, dismounted brusquely. Their expressions were harsh, suspicion, and something deeper, burning in their eyes. One stepped forward, his tone icy. We heard there's trouble here. A girl that doesn't belong. Thomas's jaw tensed, but his reply was even. She's part of this land now. Their gazes shifted, unsettled. Strange how folks come and go, but old debts linger. Behind Thomas, the girl stood silent, eyes bright with defiance, unwavering. Thomas moved beside her. No debt touches her here. Not while I draw breath. One man curled his lip, but Thomas stood steady. Go, before things turn sour. Tension stretched thin, then snapped. The riders turned, mounted, vanished in a swirl of dust. Thomas turned to her. When trouble knocks, he said low, it won't find its way in. She reached for him, her hand brushing his arm. Not in fear, but unity. Their quiet became a vow made without sound. Morning crept in gentle, pink and gold, laying soft light across the ranch. Nature exhaled after the night's unrest. In the quiet house, embers glowed, the fire long since faded. Thomas moved quietly, boots soft against the wooden floor. Dust floated in sunbeams, tiny unsettled ghosts. In the sitting room, she waited upright, hands calm in her lap, watching sunlight stretch across the frosty fields. Her gaze, once haunted, was clear. Thomas paused in the doorway before joining her. When she finally turned, their eyes met, and what once held tremors now held trust. He sat beside her, the old chair groaning beneath him. A bird sang somewhere. The silence no longer felt heavy. It felt like peace. "I won't let them scare you," he said, voice low and firm. "Not while I'm here." She slowly turned her palms to his. This time, when their fingers met, there was no hesitation. Her hand, cool and steady, rested in his. They stayed like that, quiet, joined. The past hadn't vanished, but it no longer ruled. She leaned into him, and for the first time he felt something stir, hope. The sun climbed, igniting the fields. Life returned to the land and to them. "We build from here," Thomas said. "One day at a time." She nodded, and her smile, soft, new, was the first real one he'd seen. It spoke of starting over, of healing, of daring to trust. And in the light of that gentle morning, two scarred souls chose to begin again, not flawlessly, but truly. In the days that followed, the rhythm of life resumed, slow, steady. Light poured in through the windows, warming spaces long cold. Thomas woke each morning to find her already seated at the window, tracing invisible shapes on the glass, as if rediscovering the world. Their silence grew gentle, shared. One morning, sunlight broke through as Thomas returned from town with a bundle of dusty, unopened letters. She watched, quiet but curious. At the table, he chose one and began to read aloud. His voice was soft, his words like flowing water. Tales from far away, glimpses of lives and feelings lived elsewhere. She listened, touched his hand sometimes, as if to hold onto him through the story. Later, with a scrap of charcoal, she began to draw wild horses, open fields, a small home hidden in trees. When she showed him, he saw more than sketches. He saw dreams taking form. "We'll make it real," he told her, smiling genuinely. Together, they began. Fences mended, gardens planted, the foal added to the ranch's fold. Side by side, often without words, they built. Neighbors noticed. Some kept their distance, but others nodded in quiet approval. Thomas spoke of the girl who had once arrived like a storm but remained like calm. One golden evening, she took his hand, firm, certain. Her gaze said it all. "I'm ready." Thomas held her hand. "So am I." Beneath the sky bursting with stars, they understood. This was no longer survival. It was the start of a life. In the weeks that followed, the ranch transformed, new growth, new life. The foal thrived, the soil stirred. But beneath the change, unease lingered. Word had spread. Suspicions flared. One night, as the sky dimmed, a group of men stood at the boundary of the ranch. Their words, low and sharp, reached Thomas on the porch. The girl stood beside him, her hand in his, unshaken. "She doesn't belong," one man sneered. "Bought off a drunk, wild as the wind." Thomas stepped forward. "She belongs now, and no one will tell me otherwise." The air snapped, threats flared. But the girl didn't waver. Her hands moved in quick signs, bold and unyielding. Thomas caught the meaning. Not afraid, not alone. With a voice like steel, Thomas faced them. "You want to challenge us? You'll find we're not easy to break." Faced with their quiet strength, the men faltered, then disappeared into the dark. Inside, Thomas turned to her, emotions brimming. "You surprised me." She smiled, shaking her head. "Not anymore." That night, by the fire's glow, they sat close. She reached out, touched a scar on his hand, an old mark from another life. Her fingers traced it gently. "I'm yours," she signed. Thomas met her eyes. "We're a team, now and always." Under the stars, Two people once broken became a home for each other. Morning light spilled in, soft and golden. The air was full of hay and the wild scent of blossoms. For once, the day felt full of possibility. On the porch, Thomas looked out at the endless plains. She stood beside him, real and steady. Her fingers slipped into his no words needed. They moved through the day, fencing together, laughing at small frustrations, riding across wide fields. Where once there were whispers, now there were nods. Some neighbors even smiled. That night by the fire, she rested her head on his shoulder. He held her, not to shield, but to promise. "You're home now," he whispered. She looked at him, hand on her heart. "Home," she signed. And in that moment all the past, the silence, the wounds, settled into something whole. Not perfect, but theirs. A home forged through trust, patience, and quiet love.